She thought the worst thing in her life was the cancer diagnosis, until she discovered her husband was planning a new life with someone else while she fought to stay alive. But when she uncovered what he'd hidden behind the hospital walls, and beneath their shared accounts, the real battle began. And this time she wasn't fighting to survive, she was fighting to win. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. The morning light filtered through the curtains of Leona Brooks's kitchen, gentle and quiet, like any other day. The soft clinking of her teaspoon against her mug was the only sound in the room. Outside, the early November frost had painted the windows white. The garden, once full of color, now stood still under a blanket of ice. Leona sat at the table, wrapped in a wool cardigan, her thinning hair pulled back into a low bun. The effects of her treatment had been growing stronger. The nausea came in waves now, and her strength seemed to drain quicker each week. Still, she tried to keep her routines. Tea in the morning, a few pages of poetry, a moment to pretend things were still normal. Her husband Damon called out from the hallway, "I'll be ready in 5. He sounded as smooth and confident as ever. A well-known orthopedic surgeon, Damon Brooks had built a reputation for precision, calm, and control. He had been her rock at the beginning of her diagnosis. He'd sat with her through appointments, even held her hand during the first round of chemotherapy. But lately, something had changed. When Leona reached for her tablet to check her schedule, a notification blinked at the top of the screen, an email. She recognized Damon's name in the sender line. It was odd. He rarely used her device. Curiosity turned to confusion as she tapped to open it. The message wasn't addressed to her. It was a reservation confirmation. 2 nights at Silver Lake Lodge. Special request. Rose petals on the bed, champagne on arrival. Returning guests. Her hand froze. The dates matched next week, when Damon had told her he'd be attending a surgical conference out of town. He had even mentioned how sorry he was to miss their wedding anniversary again. "Next year we'll make up for it," he had whispered, kissing her forehead. "I promise." Leona stared at the message for a long time. The warmth from her tea faded. Her heartbeat grew loud in her ears. Slowly, she scrolled to the end of the email. There it was again. Returning guests. A sound behind her broke the silence. Damon stepped into the kitchen, already dressed in a navy blazer and polished shoes. His expression shifted the moment he saw the screen. "I can explain," he said, stopping just short of the table. Leona looked up, her eyes calm but sharp. "Can you?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time in a long while, he seemed unsure. "It's not what you think," he began. "Is it not a romantic getaway with someone else?" Her voice was steady, almost too quiet. "Or has the hospital started prescribing champagne for orthopedic pain?" Damon sighed, stepping back. "Her name is Lila. She works in medical sales. It started months ago. I didn't want it to happen, but it did," Leona finished. "For him." Damon looked away. "I didn't want to add to your stress. After your diagnosis, I didn't know how to tell you. So instead you lied," she said. "And now you're telling me because I found out, not because you planned to." He nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." Leona stood, the strength in her legs weaker than she'd hoped. She moved to the window, watching a robin land near the frost-covered rose bushes. Once Damon had planted those roses for her birthday. Now they sat forgotten, just like so many promises. "Is she young?" Leona asked without turning around. "She's 33. Leona gave a soft laugh, one without humor. "Of course." "She's pregnant," Damon added, barely above a whisper. Those 2 words settled in the air like a snowstorm. Leona turned, meeting his eyes. There was no anger in hers, only something quieter. Something colder. "Does she know about me?" she asked. "Does she know you're still here, pretending to be a husband while building a new family?" Damon looked down at the floor. "She knows you're sick. She knows we're separating." "Separating?" Leona repeated. "I see. Have you already decided that too?" He didn't answer. Leona walked slowly to the table and sat down. I need you to leave, she said simply. Leona, you're not well. You shouldn't be alone. I'm not alone, she said. My friend Mira is coming to stay. I'll manage. Damon stood frozen, his jaw tense. I never meant to hurt you. But you did, she replied. While I was fighting for my life, you were making plans for a new one. He picked up his keys from the counter and paused at the door. I hope you get better. I will, Leona said. Just not for you. When the door finally closed, Leona let out a long breath she didn't know she was holding. The silence that followed felt both heavy and freeing. Outside, a soft snow began to fall. 2 weeks had passed since Damon walked out of the house. Leona Brooks sat in her living room wrapped in a soft blanket, the fireplace giving off a quiet warmth. Though she was alone now, she no longer felt like a guest in her own life. Mira Hall, her closest friend since college, had moved into the guest room days after Damon left. Her presence was steady and kind, a comfort Leona hadn't realized she needed so badly. Mira brought meals, managed phone calls, and most of all listened. But the silence that followed Damon's departure didn't mean peace. Questions kept circling in Leona's mind. Not just about love, but about survival. She was still undergoing treatment. The costs were growing, and her health insurance was tied to Damon's plan. That thought kept her awake more than the pain, or the nausea. You need to talk to someone, Mira had said one morning, handing her a cup of ginger tea. A doctor for your body, and someone for everything else, especially the money. Leona agreed. The next day, she sat across from Dr. Julia Rains, her oncologist, in a bright hospital office filled with plants and calming artwork. How are you really, Leona? The doctor asked gently. Leona smiled faintly. I'm tired. My bones hurt, and I'm trying to remember who I am without being someone's wife. Dr. Rains nodded slowly. Your blood work shows the treatment is working, but not without side effects. Physically, you're doing as expected, but emotionally, your stress levels are very high. It can affect your healing. Leona looked down at her hands. My husband is gone, and I don't know if I can afford to keep getting better. The doctor leaned forward. I want you to speak with our patient advocate team. They know how to help with these situations. Leona left the hospital with a folder full of contacts and a small spark of hope. That evening, Mira introduced her to Clark Emerson, a financial advisor she trusted. Clark arrived the next morning, quiet and polite with a leather notebook in hand. He had a soft voice and clear eyes that made Leona feel safe enough to open up. I want to know where I stand, Leona told him. If Damon is cutting me off, I need to be ready. We'll take it step by step, Clark said. Start by pulling your bank statements and anything related to joint accounts. They worked side by side for hours. Mira brought tea and cookies, and the three of them sat at the dining table surrounded by papers. Clark's calm voice guided Leona through account numbers, payments, and documents she hadn't looked at in years. And then came the first red flag. This transfer, Clark said, tapping one of the pages, $15,000 moved 3 days before he left. And this one, another $25,000 2 weeks earlier. Both into an account you don't have access to. Leona felt a chill move through her chest. He said nothing, ever. Clark flipped a few more pages. There are more, smaller amounts, all adding up. By the end of the session, Clark had made a list of concerns and promised to return the next day with a clearer plan. Leona stared at the numbers after he left, her hands trembling slightly. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was preparation. Damon had been building a future without her for months, while she sat in infusion chairs fighting to stay alive. Later that evening, Leona sat in her bedroom, holding a framed photo of her and Damon on their 10th anniversary. They were laughing, arms around each other, eyes full of joy. She set it face down on the nightstand. He knew, she whispered to herself. He knew I was getting sick, and he still made plans to leave. Mira knocked softly on the door. You okay? Leona nodded slowly. I will be, but I think I need a lawyer. Mira stepped inside and sat beside her. Then that's what we'll do. I know someone. She helped my cousin through a messy divorce. You'll like her." Leona didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked out the window at the quiet street below. The snow had started again, covering everything in a fresh white layer. It looked peaceful, but she knew better now. Still, something inside her had shifted. Fear was still there, but so was something stronger, resolve. The next morning, Clark returned with a clearer picture. "He's hiding assets," he said simply. "I've flagged everything. Your next step is legal." Leona dialed the number Mira had written on a sticky note. "Wilson Family Law," came the voice on the other end. "How can we help?" "My name is Leona Brooks," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I need to speak to an attorney. I'm preparing for a divorce, and I think my husband is trying to leave me with nothing." The snow outside had started to melt. Small patches of grass peeked through the white blanket, signaling that winter was beginning to loosen its grip. Inside Leona Brooks's home, the chill still lingered, but warmth had begun to return in quiet, steady ways. Her body was tired, thinner than before, but something inside her felt stronger. Maybe it was the new treatment. Maybe it was the way she was beginning to reclaim her life. In her study, Leona sat at her desk surrounded by open notebooks and legal papers. Her fingers rested on the keys of her laptop. The blinking cursor waited patiently for her to begin. "Start with your truth," her attorney had said. "Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is tell our story." And so Leona began to write. She wrote about the day she found the email. She wrote about the moment she looked at her husband and realized he was already gone. She wrote about the way betrayal felt like falling through ice, silent, sudden and cold. As the words spilled out, so did the weight she had carried. It was painful, but freeing. Meanwhile, Mira continued to be her rock. She brought meals, ran errands, and made sure Leona rested when she forgot to. Most importantly, she reminded Leona she was never truly alone. Clark, the financial advisor, had now teamed up with a young law student named Talia Givens. Talia was part of a patient advocacy program that worked with people going through health and legal issues at the same time. She had warm eyes and a focused mind. She listened to Leona's story with care and asked thoughtful questions. "We found more," Talia told her during one of their meetings. "Your husband submitted a form to remove you from his health plan. He listed your status as permanently separated before the divorce even began." Leona's mouth went dry. "That would cancel my coverage?" "Yes," Talia said. "But the form wasn't processed yet, and now that we know, we can stop it." Leona sat back in her chair, breathing deeply. "He's really trying to disappear. Me." Talia didn't answer right away. Instead, she opened a folder and placed it on the table. "He's also being investigated. One of the hospital board members sent us this. There's an anonymous complaint about Damon using hospital time and resources for personal travel, and possibly forging some of the financial documents tied to your insurance." Leona blinked. "I never imagined it would go this far." "That's the thing about people who build their lives on lies," Talia said gently. "They never stop until someone makes them." Leona nodded slowly. For months she had felt powerless, first from the cancer, then from the betrayal. But now she realized that power didn't always come in big moments. Sometimes it came from quiet decisions. Choosing to speak up, choosing to fight back. That evening, as she sat in her study writing again, her phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Rains. Her blood counts were improving. The treatment was finally showing signs of working. Leona stared at the message, tears welling in her eyes. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe she might survive. Not just the illness, but everything. The next morning, Leona went out to her garden. The snow had melted enough to see the tips of her rose bushes. They looked bare and lifeless, but she knew better. Beneath the surface, they were still alive. She reached for her pruning shears and began to cut away the dead branches. It felt good, like clearing space for something new. Starting early, Mira called from the porch holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Just getting ready," Leona said with a smile. Later that week, Clark returned with more news. His attorney sent over a settlement offer. he said, sliding the papers across the table. But it's not enough. And it comes with a condition. You can't speak publicly about anything that happened. Leona picked up the paper, scanned the offer, then set it down. Then we decline. Clark looked surprised. Are you sure? We could try to negotiate. I'm sure, Leona said firmly. I'm writing a book, and I'm not going to trade my truth for a check. He smiled. Then we'll move forward. As spring approached, Leona continued writing. Her manuscript grew, chapter by chapter. She poured herself into every page. Her voice, once quiet and uncertain, had become strong and clear. Mira arranged a small gathering in the garden one evening, just a few close friends. Candles flickered in glass jars. Soft music played. For a moment, Leona forgot everything. Doctors, lawyers, court dates. She was simply herself again. To healing, Mira said, raising a glass. And to telling the truth, Leona added. They clinked glasses and the sound rang out like a bell full of promise. As the stars came out and laughter filled the air, Leona felt something deep in her chest. It wasn't joy exactly. Not yet. But it was hope, steady, honest, and alive. She looked out at her garden where tiny green buds had started to appear. The bloom after winter had begun. The day of the settlement hearing arrived with a gentle spring rain. Soft drops tapped against the courthouse, windows filling the air with a quiet rhythm. Leona Brooks sat beside her attorney in a room that smelled faintly of paper and coffee. The same hands that had once trembled from fear now rested calmly in her lap. Her treatment was working. Her strength was returning. And her story, written in the quiet hours of pain and healing, was nearly finished. Damon arrived 10 minutes late. His eyes looked tired, his suit too perfectly pressed as if he hoped neatness could cover guilt. Beside him stood a woman Leona recognized from a photo she'd once found in a hidden folder on Damon's old phone. Her name was Ivy. Ivy's expression was unreadable, though her arms were wrapped tightly around her growing belly. The judge entered and the room came to life. Introductions were made, papers shuffled, terms were reviewed. Leona watched Damon as he avoided her gaze, focused instead on the page in front of him. He looked smaller somehow, as if the choices he had made had finally caught up to him. The judge asked if either party wished to speak before the terms were signed. Damon stood first. I want this to be fair, he said. I want to move forward, with peace. I hope Leona finds happiness. He sat down quickly, voice even but empty. Leona stood slowly. She looked at the judge, then at the table where her life had been broken into numbers and percentages. I don't need revenge, she said. I only want to live without fear, to be healthy, to write my story in my own words, not in the silence others tried to leave me with. The judge nodded, and with a final signature, it was done. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was still, gray but softer. Leona stepped out of the courthouse with a lightness in her step. Mira was waiting in the car with a wide smile and a warm hug. How do you feel? She asked. Free, Leona answered. And ready. In the weeks that followed, the pages of her book came together. She finished the final chapter one quiet evening in her garden, the scent of new roses in the air. Her hair had started to grow back in soft waves, and her energy had returned enough for long walks and morning tea on the porch. The book was titled, A Future Rewritten, and when she sent it to publishers, she wasn't sure anyone would care. But someone did. A small publishing house called her just 1 week later. They wanted to print it. They believed it would help others. Those abandoned during illness. Those healing from betrayal. Those learning to start again. One morning, as Leona reviewed the final proofs, her phone buzzed with a message from Talia, the law student who had worked on her case. Check the news, the message said. Leona opened the article. Dr. Damon Brooks had been placed under investigation by the hospital board. Anonymous sources revealed unethical behavior, including misuse of hospital resources and attempts to remove a spouse from health insurance during active treatment. Leona sat quietly for a moment, staring at the screen. There was no joy in it, only truth catching up to the lies. She closed the article, placed her phone down, and turned her attention back to her manuscript. The truth had found its voice, not just in court or online, but in her words. A few days later, Leona received an invitation to speak at a health conference. They wanted her to share her experience, not as a victim, but as someone who had faced the storm and found her way through it. Mira went with her. They traveled together, laughing in hotel lobbies, eating late dinners, and watching sunsets from quiet balconies. When Leona stood on stage to speak, she looked out at the crowd and saw more than just faces. She saw stories waiting to be told, lives in the middle of becoming something new. Sometimes, she said to the room, we lose what we thought would last forever, and sometimes that's the start of something better. Not because the pain disappears, but because we learn that we are more than what we've lost. The room was silent, not because they didn't know what to say, but because her words had settled deep inside them. After the talk, people lined up to speak with her. Patients, nurses, writers. One woman held her hand and whispered, "Thank you for saying what? I couldn't." When she returned home, Leona found a letter waiting in her mailbox. It was from Ivy. "He's not who I thought he was," the letter read. "You deserved better, and so do I. Thank you for showing me a different way." Leona folded the letter and placed it inside a small wooden box on her bookshelf. A quiet reminder that healing can spread in unexpected ways. In her garden, the roses were blooming more brightly than they had in years. She spent mornings tending to them, her fingers brushing the petals like old friends. The past had left its mark. But the future was hers again, not perfect, but true, and beautifully rewritten.